So, obviously unsurprising, North Dakota of the House passes school gender pronoun prohibition. Public schools and state agencies in North Dakota would be prohibited from referring to students and employees by any pronouns that don't reflect the sex assigned to them at birth under a bill provided by by the legislator. The House approved the bill 60 to 32 on Wednesday. It passed the Senate last month and now awaits the signature of Republican Governor Doug Burgum. In 2021, Burgum vetoed a bill that would have restricted transgender students from participating in public elementary and secondary school sports. Again, a red herring. But Burgum has not uh, paid said publicly if he supports this latest measure. The bill is among hundreds nationwide that are taking aim at nearly every facet of transgender existence, from pronouns to bathroom use to healthcare to athletics. In North Dakota, similar bills to restrict transgender athletes have passed the House this session with veto-proof majorities. The Senate has not voted on them. Last week, Wyoming became the 19th state to ban transgender athletes from playing on girls' or women's sports. Quote, it's another week of a legislative session, and we have another bill that's telling certain people that they have value or don't have value in our state. Democratic Representative Josh Borshi of Fargo said that he urged lawmakers to vote against the pronoun bill. Right before the vote, Republican Representative Sue Ann Olson of Baldwin continued, quote, 5 years ago, this whole pronoun thing wasn't a thing. It puts teachers in a very difficult position of keeping up with students who switch their pronouns. She said, quote, it's just a common sense bill that deserves a green vote. The bill would not criminalize teachers or state employees, and if a teacher received approval from a student's parent or guardian, and from the school administrator, the teacher would be allowed to use the pronouns a student prefers. Although the measure also affects state employees outside schools, Wednesday's debate focused mostly on educational staff who would be affected. Supporters said the bill would ease burdens on teachers and create better learning environments for students. The bill would allow teachers to, quote, rest their relief that they only need to remember one name and one set of historically recognized biological pronouns, which makes no sense because pronouns aren't. Okay, whatever. Republican Representative Lori Van Winkle of Minute said in support, she added that the bill would instill confidence in parents that their kids are safe at school and create learning environments without social distractions. But of course, focusing on this is a distraction. Opportunities. The font is really small to my eyes or something. Opponents, including Democratic Representative Mary Schneider of Fargo, cited the testimony of countless people who argued the bill would harm LGBTQ youth, mental health therapists, school counselors, social workers, suicide prevention advocates, church leaders, and more. As much as I do think this is like a little silly that we're focusing on this, I see no harm in the long run letting kids have these pronouns. Obviously, any person who thinks this is just like a threat to national security is pretty silly. Most people, when they're doing attendance, they go by names anyways, at least back in my day. Alright. Schneider noted that these experts said the bill would not protect kids or promote learning because, quote, the real threat to children are poverty, hunger, lack of health care, gun violence, bigotry, social pressures, mental health, and the bills like these. Definitely true. And of course, we're not doing anything about gun violence. We just let it happen. So it was never about protecting the kids, but oh, what seems more tolerable to have in our society. Because obviously, there's a lot of people who are a fan of guns, and that pretty much outweighs the safety regulations. All right. Democrats and Republicans voted against the bill. A survey by the Trevor Project in 2022 found that 45% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide in the previous year, but that those who reported socially or at school reported lower rates. Trisha Ahmed is a corps member of the Associated Press Report for America State's House News Initiative. Report for America is a non-profit national service program that places journalists in local newsrooms to report on undercover issues. Follow her on Twitter. Yeah, okay. Oh, that was quick. Wow, it's such a non-issue that that it's not even worth talking about. Okay. All right. So this is a serious thing. I'm not saying this to discredit it, but this person holding this sign that says things Republicans fear, love diversity, acceptance, and the last one, things drags teaches. Um, that's a little odd because, I mean, I guess it's just like they teach fashion. That's not really like a social policy or anything. Obviously, there are drag people who do drag that are speaking out about this anti-LGBT discrimination, and they deserve the right to, because they're getting lumped in with it. But it's just a little awkward to see that. Okay. A, propor- a proposed ban on gender affirming care for minors would affect Oklahoma adults too. House Bill 2177 bans care for minors, but it also bans insurance coverage and public funds for trans Oklahomans for all ages. House Bill 2177 is making its way through the state's House. It supports to ban it reports to ban gender affirming care for children and teens in Oklahoma. Supporters say children and teens aren't equipped to make life altering health decisions for themselves, which on its face is, it makes sense. Um, but obviously, this is just meant to make you concerned and be against it. All right, quote. There, I think, are just an increasing number of trans people worried about, even though they are not minors, could still afford care here, said Nicole McAfee, the executive director of 2S LGBTQ plus advocacy organizations, Freedom Oklahoma. Could they afford to move? If not, one provision says no health facility receiving state funds can administer gender affirming care to anyone of any age. Another provision would ban insurance companies from covering gender affirming care, again, for all Oklahomans, no matter how old they are. Quote, would that mean that facilities that did blood work for people who needed hormone level checks relative to hormones that they are prescribed? They said, quote, like there would be something that would no longer be covered? Without insurance, gender affirmation surgeries can run anywhere from 20,000 to more than 100,000, but long before someone considers surgery, it's common to undergo significantly less invasive care, medications like hormones or hormone blockers. State Impact talked with trans Oklahomans about the risks people could face if the bill passed, and these new barriers to access make care too difficult to find. We aren't using their names because of discrimination concerns. One of the people we talked with raised concern about concerning medications. Quote, a lot of trans people, they don't have access to doctors and things like that, will get meds through online sources that are not as reputable, she said. When a patient starts hormones, the medical provider conducts blood tests to see whether their current levels are and tests them multiple times over 6 months. And without insurance, that is a very costly, she said. When I was doing that, it ended up being like $200 per appointment. Jesus Christ. And even with well-sourced medication, taking it without medical supervision can be harmful. Some medications can have side effects that are life-threatening. One testosterone blocker can cause patients to retain too much potassium. Having a potassium level spike can cause heart palpitations, vomiting, chest pains, and death. Again, this is not against this medication, but this is why people need medical professionals to analyze where you are, obviously. And it makes sense, like potassium, any overdose on a certain chemical in your body could be threatening. This is not this is not really a trans thing. This is just in general. You don't want chemicals or an overdose of a certain thing. All right, just saying. Quote: I actually had that happen to me, and I can't take that medication for that reason, she said. But I wouldn't have known that if I couldn't get blood tests. Another Oklahoman we talked with, she's moved to Oklahoma years ago for work, noting that the legislator often talks about attracting workers. Quote, they did attract me here, she said. I actually love this city. I'm in Oklahoma City. But with bills like this one, a Senate bill criminalizing gender-affirming care for minors and others that aim to winnow down 2S LGBTQ plus rights, she and her spouse found jobs out of state. Quote, the underlying content of these bills, I think, is just, they don't want me here, she said. They don't want people like me here. I guess it's working because I'm leaving, and I hate that. Damn. Each of the bills mentioned in this story made it out of their chambers of origin, so the House and Senate, and will start the committee process in the opposite chamber in the coming weeks. Alright. And this is just... Alright. Transgender people considering moving as Indiana transition care ban advances. By Garrett Bergquist. Indianapolis, transgender Hoosiers told News 8 on Tuesday that their options are running out after a House committee approved a ban on transition care for minors. The bill cleared the House Public Health Committee on mostly party line vote that marked its passage through the Senate earlier this session. It would ban hormone therapy, puberty blockers, or surgery for gender transition uses for anyone under 18. As is, people aren't getting surgery in their younger years anyways, but I think it's just obvious by now. The bill includes exceptions for people who are intersex or for medical procedures other than gender transition care that require such drugs. With the bill's passage looking increasingly likely, transgender people and their families said they are debating whether to move to more LGBTQ-friendly states. Leah Lacey said that 15-year-old transgender son would have to stop treatment if the bill becomes law. She said her son underwent psychiatric confinement 5 times from 4th grade until he came out in 7th grade and began treatment a year or so later. Lacey said her son became happier and much more involved once he began receiving treatment, joining his school's marching band and swimming team. She said she and her family are considering moving to Minnesota if the bill becomes law. The governor there recently issued an executive order requiring the state's agencies to protect access to gender-affirming care. I don't want to have to move, she said. I would have to leave my family, and he doesn't want to move. I mean, nobody should have to move. Anyways, following the bill's passage of a committee, Stefani Sharp told News 8 she fears it's only a matter of time before lawmakers come after transgender adults like her. She said she, like Lacey, has already begun laying the groundwork for moving out of state if she feels it's necessary. Quote, I already have family friends who have asked, and if they confirm that it gets real bad, that I can leave and crash on their couch, she said. The bill's supporters repeatedly point to instances where someone received gender transition care and regretted their decision. Zandra Roberts said she, for several years in her 20s, and said that she is still dealing with the lingering effects of testosterone injections. I'm thankful that there were more barriers that prevented me from transitioning when I was still in school, she said. According to a 2015 U.S. transgender survey of nearly 28,000 transgender Americans conducted by the National Center for Transgender Equality, about 8% of transgender people have detransitioned at some point in their lives. This is usually temporary and typically results from outside pressure. Just 5% of people who detransitioned, or 0.4% of transgender people overall, reporting doing so because they concluded transitioning wasn't right for them. The bill now moves to the full House. The committee did not make any changes, so it would go directly to the governor's desk if it passes the House without any floor amendments. Governor Eric Holcomb has not yet publicly stated his position on the measure. Alright, guys. The last article for now. Trans children were the beginning. The GOP is coming for adults now. The politicians who've repeatedly introduced anti-trans bill under the guise of, quote, protecting children are routinely going after adults now. A newly proposed health care ban in Florida could effectively ban gender-affirming care for all ages. In yet another indication... Wait, what the heck? Why would it do that? Sorry guys, that was so random. Alright. I'll get back to this in a second. Hold on, guys. Okay. I might have to make this a separate, video if it keeps doing this. Okay. Florida HB 1421 will prohibit insurance providers, including private insurers, from covering gender-affirming care, which can cost tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket. Quote, a health insurance policy may not provide coverage for gender clinical interventions, the bill states. Florida previously introduced a bill that will force businesses that pay for gender-affirming care to also pay for detransitions, in a bid to further restrict access to life-saving health care for transgender people by de-incentivizing employees from covering care in the first place. And according to experts, H1B 1421 is worded so vaguely that it could make it difficult for trans adults to access other forms of healthcare as well. Well, the law is always vague, so it's just convenient in this case. Quote, it would ban health insurance coverage for birth control, HRT, for menopause, treatments for breast cancer, including mastectomies, treatment for prostate cancer, and any treatment that involves primary or secondary sex characteristics, said attorney Alejandro Carabello, an instructor at Harvard Law Cyber Law Clinic. Okay. The bill would also ban gender-affirming care for trans youth, echoes a new law in South Dakota. Both include a clause that effectively forces youth to detransition before the year is up by forcing healthcare professionals to gradually discontinue their treatments, including puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy. HB 1421 is not the first bill introduced country that would limit access to life-saving critical care for trans adults. In fact, the same politicians who repeatedly introduce anti-trans bills under the guise of protecting the children are routinely going after adults now. Tennessee is also trying to block insurance providers from covering gender-affirming care, while other states are explicitly trying to ban care for some adults altogether. Earlier this year, Oklahoma became the first state to propose a gender affirming care ban for people under 26, and Kansas is proposing a trans healthcare ban for people under 21. South Carolina is also attempting to ban people under 21 from accessing gender affirming care and would prohibit the use of public funds to cover treatment. Um, Earlier this month, the Texas introduced its own bill that would criminalize doctors who provide gender affirming care for people under 26. The same bill prohibits insurance companies from covering gender affirming care for the same age group. Quote, attacks on transgender people are not about protecting children, but rather about eradicating transgenderism, as Michael Knowles put it in his recent infamous CPAC speech. End quote. Transgender writer and activist Erin Reed wrote in her newsletter this week, quote, I expect these kinds of bills targeting adult care to become increasingly common over the next 2 years. GOP lawmakers across the country have been largely fixated on prohibiting trans health care for youth, and at least 10 states have already passed such bans. This year alone have seen nearly 500 anti-trans bills introduced across the country, and record-breaking number. Proposed bills range from gender-affirming care bans and bills that bar trans people from using bathrooms that correspond to their gender, to drag bans and bans on name and pronoun changes on government-issued documents. The situation is becoming so tenuous that some people are referring to the assault on trans rights as a genocide. Which I will get to soon, actually. Okay. Hold on. Sorry about that. What the heck? Oh, sorry about that. They are, quote, they are trying to bring about conditions that will result in the loss of life and inability to participate in public life among transgender people, Reed told Vice News last year. Studies show that gender-affirming care isn't harmful, it's life-saving. Trans people are more likely to experience mental health struggles, including anxiety, depression, PTSD, and thoughts of suicide, than cisgender people. Nearly half of all LGBTQ youth have seriously considered suicide. But experts say some of these risks can be mitigated with gender-affirming care, which includes puberty blockers and other therapies. Most trans adults say that transitioning helped them feel more satisfied, according to New Washington Post and KFF poll. These interventions, endorsed by several major national medical associations, are safe and effective and are correlated with better health health outcomes for trans people. Alright, I'll be back, guys.